Hey friend, welcome back to the Lifestyle School podcast. I am your host, Hope Plack, and if you are new here, I want to give you a big welcome. This podcast is all about helping you simplify healthy living, understanding your body, improving your metabolic health, and creating a lifestyle that actually supports the life that you want to live at a healthy weight and with your absolute best health. And so today we're going to be talking about the ketogenic diet. We're going to talk about insulin resistance and why I personally prefer a modified keto approach paired with feasting and fasting when it comes to losing weight. And I prefer this instead of a rigid macro tracking or calorie counting extreme diet. And today we're going to talk about keto because it is one of those topics that people tend to have very strong opinions about, right? As are most things in the nutrition space. Some people believe it's the greatest thing ever. Others think it's dangerous or unsustainable or just maybe another fad diet. And so today I think part of, the reason there's so much confusion around this topic is because people are often talking about completely different versions of keto. Some people are doing therapeutic ketosis for neurological conditions. Some are eating bacon and butter and cheese all day long and calling it keto. Some are tracking every gram or calorie of food that enters their mouth, and others are just lowering carbohydrates and eating more whole foods. So today I want to kind of sort through all of this, maybe simplify this conversation. And so let me kind of walk you through what we're going to be covering today in this episode. We're going to start by talking about what is a traditional ketogenic diet? What are the macros involved with that? Then we're going to move to why keto can work incredibly well for people with insulin resistance. That's really the aim of this episode is I want to talk to those people who have insulin resistance, and who are trying to lose weight because my heart is for you because this is something that I have struggled with. Insulin resistance makes weight loss incredibly difficult. Then I want to talk a little bit about how insulin resistance develops. How would you know if you have insulin resistance? Maybe you're suspicious. Maybe you're just like newer to that term. But I want to give you some tools to be able to try to figure out if you are insulin resistant. Then I want to move on to talking about why I personally do not teach strict macro or calorie tracking. I would say this is a little bit more controversial approach that I take. If you've spent any time online, you know that most nutrition coaches out there, dietitians, etc., are kind of yelling at you that if you aren't losing weight, it's because you're not accurately tracking your calories. And I take a totally different approach to this. And I've had a lot of success as well have my clients because we don't believe that the body is this closed loop system of calories in versus calories out. Anyway, back to what we're getting to today. And then we're going to move to why I prefer a more flexible whole food based approach. That's keto adjacent is maybe a better way of putting it. And then we're going to end by kind of talking about why I believe your diet should evolve depending on the season of your life. And I do think that's a really important point that I am excited to cover today. So, because at the end of the day, the best diet is not necessarily always the one that looks best on paper, right? The best diet, and when I say diet, guys, today I want to be clear, I'm not talking about doing a 30-day diet, the whole 30 diet or the paleo diet. Diet just means the foods you're choosing to eat. When I use the word diet, I'm not trying to say when I say diet, I'm not specifically talking about trying to lose weight. I'm talking about the diet equals the food you choose to eat. So the best diet or foods you choose to eat is the one that you can adhere to long term and one that actually loves you back, right? We got to eat foods that love us back or we're not going to get anywhere on our health journey or our weight loss journey. So with that, before we get into the nitty gritty of today's episode, as always, a quick reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only. And It is not intended as medical advice. Always consult with your healthcare provider before making major changes to your diet, fasting routines, supplements, or exercise, especially if you have underlying health concerns. And then, is always a little reminder, if you enjoy this episode, make sure you subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. I'd love it if you'd share it with a friend, leave a review, and then follow me over on Instagram and or Facebook at Hope Platt Coaching. Because I would love to interact with you guys over there and hear what you're thinking about regarding the episodes I'm putting out. What are topics that you would like to hear me cover? And then one last thing, I wanted to mention that my supplement store is open. So if you've been wanting high quality, third-party tested supplements you can actually trust, that is where to get them. Head over to my website, www.hopeplattcoaching.com. In the top right corner of my website, you will see a button that says store, and that will take you right over there. All of these supplements are third-party tested for quality and purity, which unfortunately isn't something you're guaranteed when you're buying supplements from places like Amazon or Costco or your local health food store. Supplements are not FDA regulated, which is a little bit, crazy, and it makes them the Wild West. And so you want to make sure you're getting third party tested supplements. And so if you guys want to use the same professional grade products that I use and recommend to my clients, it's an easy way to support this podcast. So if that interests you, you can go over to my website, peruse what is available. And then you will need a code though to check out to create an account. And that code is 104567. Again, that's 104567. And I will put that in the bottom of today's show notes. And maybe if you're thinking like, I feel like I need a little bit more, I don't think I'm getting what I need from my diet. When it comes to like supplementing, you can head over to episode 43, and I cover my core 4 supplement recommendations and why they matter for metabolic health. So head over there and check it out. If you're interested, again, that would be the easiest way to support this show so that I can create, easy, accessible, not easy. I don't know why I said that. So you can, sorry, guys, it's early. I lost my train of thought, but this is the best way to support the show. Order from my supplement store. Okay. One last thing before we get into today's episode, promise this is the last thing. Little brief update on my own weight loss journey. You guys, I'm 6 weeks in. It's crazy to think about. I put on here how much weight I've lost, like my lowest weigh-in since last week. It's again Monday morning recording this, but it's exciting. So I had 2 weeks of consecutive no weight gain. My weight was actually above the lowest weigh-in that I've had. And I weigh myself multiple times a week, not every day. But I had my lowest weigh-in this weekend, which was very exciting. My weight went down 3.3 pounds, which to be honest is not surprising. To me, last week, my weigh-in was like 0.3 pounds or something above my lowest weigh-in to date. The week before that, I had taken like 3 days off of fasting, and I had just indulged a lot. And so I was expecting my weight to be up. I had like gained 3 pounds in 3 days. And then last week, my weight had kind of like evened out. And then this week, we're down 3.3 pounds. And this is just like the nature of the cycle of weight loss. You're going to have a week where you're like, why is the scale not moving? And then the next week, your scale drops like 3 pounds. And then, maybe you have 1 pound, and the next day, week 0 or 2. And, it's a little bit all over the place. I wish it was like super linear, easy to predict. But, the longer you, are on a weight loss journey, the more you kind of start to realize the patterns. And, this is my 4th baby. So I've been through this a long time trying to lose weight. So this puts me just 3 pounds away, guys, from like my first real goal. And, I've kind of been going back and forth in my head if I want to share like actual numbers of like what my scale is saying, because I think for so many women specifically, there's like we associate things with different numbers, right? But at the end of the day, I don't think the number really matters. And so I go back and forth on sharing this, but I'm just gonna share it because I don't need to feel any shame about how much I weigh. So for reference, you guys, for those of you who have never met me in real life, I am 5'10". I'm quite tall, and I would say I have a very like athletic build. I'm not like, I wouldn't say like big boned, but I do have quite a bit of muscle on my body, despite the ups and downs of my training schedule. And so I, at like very fit, healthy weight, I would say for me is about 155 pounds, 160 pounds. So that's kind of like where I'm aiming for my weight loss journey. I started this weight loss journey at just over 216 pounds, which is by far the most I have ever weighed. Usually, after I have a baby, I come in right under 200 pounds, and then I start my weight loss journey from there. So, that's a significant difference, almost 20 pounds heavier this time around, which, has felt a little bit disheartening. But, at the end of the day, I can't control it on some level. How much weight my body was putting on at the end of pregnancy. Like I said, I was exercising, I was eating low carb, I wasn't eating too much, I was moving as much as like my body could tolerate. And so, there's just like a piece of that where you have to have your hands held open. But I'm excited to share with you guys. I'm just 3 pounds away from that, from 200 pounds. So I'm 203. And my goal had been to be under 200 pounds by the end of June. And honestly, like as of last week, I was like, I don't think it's possible for me to get there. But after, this weigh-in, I'm like, I got about 2 weeks left. I am leaving to go back to see family in Minnesota at the end of the month. So, losing weight on a trip is usually never like, it's never probably good to try to plan to lose weight while you're on a trip. Maybe if it happens, it happens. But a lot of times, that's just like not the goal of the trip, right? The goal would be to maintain and enjoy yourself and then kind of get back to your rhythms and schedules once you get back home to your normal routines. But so guys, with that, I am just like fingers crossed. I'm going to keep working hard these next 2 weeks. We're at home. I've got 3 fasts planned for me this week. I have back to doing 3 42-hour fasts each week. So I'm fasting Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I just do find that I do like that fasting routine as long as I'm getting enough sleep. This last week, there was one day specifically my Friday fast where I went into it knowing that I was tired. And so I really leaned into the fasting aids. And we haven't talked about fasting aids on here in a long time. And so I just wanted to bring that up and share that with you guys. So what fasting aids are like, it's like, think of them as like training wheels on your bike. So ideally, if you don't need training wheels, right, you don't use them because you can bike faster and just everything is a little bit easier. But if you need them, if they're going to help you get farther, then you might as well use them. And that's how I think about fasting aids. So the main ones that I use and I recommend to my clients are doing heavy cream in coffee or tea, bone broth. I didn't actually end up using any bone broth, but that is a great fasting aid, especially if you feel like you're getting behind on your fluids and electrolytes. And then I do electrolyte packets, which are really helpful. Those are like the 3 things. And so on like that Friday, I ended up doing, I had my normal 2 cups of coffee. I did heavy cream in them. And I think I ended up doing like 3 packs of electrolytes, which I could just tell like I needed more. I also tried to take like a little nap. I think I did make that happen, but we made it through all of our fasts last week. And there's no shame in, using the tools that you need to get to the end of your fast. All we can do is control the controllables, right? And then, so last week, the other thing I wanted to share with you guys that happened is I think I maybe tore my labrum in my shoulder. I think it's my labrum. I'm having a moment of like, yeah, labrum, a labral tear. I was like, wait, is this the right word? And I was doing a shoulder press. It wasn't even like, a crazy weight. I had the week before done a weight like 2.5 pounds lighter than that. And I was like halfway up the rep, my third rep, and my shoulder just like gave out and it externally rotated. I was able to like bail out of the lift okay, but I immediately knew something was off. And so now I'm at this point where like moving my arm at all, it's like clicking a lot and it's hurting. I'm going to go see my chiropractor today and also try to get in with my GP and maybe see if I can have some imaging done. But it's just like, oh, this is not what I need at this time. I don't need any more physical things keeping me from training because, my back has been this continual issue and I've also been having some knee problems. So, I've just been trying to reflect on that. It's definitely not ideal when you just feel like your body is falling apart. It's like I do all of these things to, make to like hopefully help my body thrive. And I mean, I do ask a lot of my body also. I do a lot of physical activity. And I just keep coming back to like we can control the controllables, right? And right now, like my shoulder and its trajectory to feeling better and being able to do like arm exercises is just not really in my control. Yes, I'm going to do the things that I need to do to try to get it better faster, but at the end of the day, like I can't say like, okay, well, in 1 week, this shoulder is going to be better, which is ideally what I'd like to do, right? So I'm just going to continue like I've done with my back to focus on doing the exercises that I can. We might be doing a lot of core exercises this next couple of weeks. I might, step away from doing as much weight stuff just because there's not as much that I can do and play ping pong with the old guys at my gym for a little bit and like, have fun doing that. So I share that to encourage you that there's just like always something, right? On our weight loss journey, our journey to our best health, there's always something in life that comes up that feels like a roadblock. There's never a good or convenient time to try to lose weight and try to get healthy. You just have to set in your mind and decide like we're going to do this because we care about ourselves enough. And that's where I have found myself this week. I care about my health and I know everything is going to get better from like a physical health standpoint if I can lose this weight. Like I'll be less inflamed, there'll be less pressure on my joints. I'll be able to move easier. Everything will be better. And so that's where I am keeping my focus. I'm not going to allow this to, get me down in the dumps. And I'm just going to be thankful for the things that I can do. And I do think that's really a shift in my perspective because for a long time, probably at least a year, I was just really hung up on all the things I couldn't do. And at the end of the day, that didn't get me anywhere. So with that, guys, that is my update on my weight loss journey. I would love to hear where you are at on your weight loss journey. And I hope you feel encouraged. And just know, you're not alone. We're in this grind together. We're doing it every day. We have a choice to show up and to put in the work. And I am here doing it alongside of you. So let's get into what is like a traditional keto diet. Let's start by defining what keto actually is. So the ketogenic diet is a very low carb diet. High fat diet designed to shift the body into a metabolic state called ketosis. Ketosis happens when carbohydrate intake becomes low enough that the body starts to primarily burn fat and ketones for fuel instead of relying mostly on incoming glucose or stored glucose. Ketones are molecules produced by our liver from fat. And that's why liver health is super important, right? Because we want them to be able to produce ketones. They essentially become an alternative fuel source for the brain and the body when glucose availability becomes very low or scarce. And so, this is some the ketogenic diet, like producing ketones is not anything new. It's not like a new like biohacking thing. It's been around forever. Humans have always had the ability to enter ketosis. And I would say historically, ketosis would happen during, times of fasting, whether for religious purposes or for, just like foods, like times without food, historically we haven't had a 7-Eleven on every corner or a grocery store. Ketosis would happen during times of food scarcity, prolonged periods between meals, prolonged physical activity, and seasonal food shortages. All of these things would, prompt our bodies to activate ketosis. And, this is our body's backup fuel system for survival. We were designed to do this. And I would say our modern problem is that many people never access it anymore because we're constantly eating not just any food, but refined carbohydrates. And that is constantly stimulating insulin because insulin is going to block your body's ability to get into ketosis. High insulin blocks ketosis. So traditionally, ketogenic diets were very high in fat. The classic keto macro ratio is usually around 70 to 80% fat intake, 10 to 20% protein, and then 5 to 10% carbohydrates. And so that means your diet is primarily going to be things like eggs, butter, oils, fatty meats, avocados, cheese, heavy cream, nuts, and then, some low carb vegetables because the primary, and all of these are going to be like the primary foods that you really lean into. I should also say like fatty fish. I mean, fatty fish, fatty meat are kind of the same thing, but historically, keto was actually developed, and I think given the name as a medical treatment for epilepsy, which I think is very interesting. The researchers discovered that putting the body into ketosis could reduce seizure frequency in some patients, particularly in children. But over time, the researchers also started noticing different benefits in other areas, including things like obesity, type 2 diabetes, PCOS, neurological diseases, metabolic syndrome, and insulin resistance. And, physiologically, if you think about it, it makes total sense. Because when carbohydrate intake significantly drops, insulin levels also tend to fall. And insulin matters because insulin is not just, a blood sugar hormone, it's also a storage hormone, right? And when insulin is chronically elevated, it becomes much harder for the body to access that stored fat for fuel and make ketones. And many people today are living in this state of chronically elevated insulin just due to our environment and our eating patterns. And it's not because they are weak or lazy. It's because we are constantly bombarded and surrounded by ultra processed foods. We're always being offered food and snacks. It's so easy to pick up a drink that's, just loaded with sugar and liquid calories. And then simultaneously, we're not getting a good amount of sleep. We're staying up late scrolling on our phones, or, just doing, having our wind down time after we put the kids to bed, but not really doing anything for ourselves. We're super stressed because of work and life and relationships. We're not moving as much as we have historically have, right? We're pretty sedentary. And then on top of that, not only are we eating ultra processed foods, but we're eating them super frequently because they're super addictive, right? And then once you start, it's so hard to stop. And all of these things contribute to chronically elevated insulin levels. And, when people find that their insulin comes down, this is what I hear over and over and over from my clients, as well as like this is my own experience. People find that they have so much more energy and that energy is so much more stable. So like you wake up energized, you have energy all the way to bedtime, and then you're like, okay, I am ready for bed. But you're not having that huge dip in the afternoon where you're like, I am either going to fall asleep at my desk, if I don't have a cup of coffee right now. You miss that afternoon slump. And you also find that, you're not hungry every 2 to 3 hours, constantly needing more food, and the cravings go away. So it's also like hunger and the cravings subside substantially. And then, you find that you have better blood sugar stability, and you find that you're able to lose fat so much easier because your body's actually able to access that stored fat. And so that brings us to insulin resistance. And I know this is like a common topic that we touch on here on the show, but it's just so important because there was like a new study that came out recently, and historically, I had said, when I started this podcast, we were kind of at this point where only about 12% of the population is metabolically healthy. And insulin resistance is part of, if you're insulin resistant, you can't be metabolically healthy. They like metabolic health and insulin resistance go hand in hand. And I'm having a hard time nailing down. I think the newest stat was like, it's like anywhere from only 8 to 6% of the population is metabolically healthy. And so it's like, I mean, in such a short time, it's getting even worse. And that's not good, right? And so we have to be talking about this. We have to bring awareness to metabolic health and insulin resistance, because insulin resistance is one of the biggest drivers behind modern weight gain and metabolic dysfunction. And like so many people, unfortunately, have metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance, and they have no idea. So let's simplify this process of insulin resistance, hopefully, so that it just is super easy to understand. So when you eat carbohydrates, right? So that's like things like grains, tortillas, chips, bread, cakes, obviously. But, for some people, even things like fruit, unfortunately, not unfortunately, but it can contribute to this. But so when you eat any carbohydrates that are not like, broccoli, it's going to be broken down into glucose, varying amounts of glucose, I should say. Glucose enters the bloodstream, and then insulin is released from the pancreas. And insulin's job is to move that glucose out of the bloodstream into the cells where it can be used for energy. But over time, if insulin levels stay elevated constantly, the cells start becoming less and less responsive to insulin's signal. And this is insulin resistance. Think of it like this. If you're a mom, you're going to get this. This is the stage I'm in. I'm becoming children resistant. If you have small kids that are constantly saying, mom, 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 20 million times a day, where you're hearing your name, mom, mom, at some point you start to tune it out, right? And then it just like makes the problem worse. They have to say mom, mom, mom more. And then they get frustrated. You get frustrated. You become mom resistant. Same thing with insulin. If your insulin is constantly stimulated, it starts becoming less, the cells start becoming less responsive to insulin signal, and you develop insulin resistance. Your body is essentially starting to say, we're getting too much stimulation. So then what happens is the pancreas compensates by producing more insulin, right? And it's not that we didn't need more insulin, just what we had wasn't communicating, but as a protective mechanism, because, super high blood sugar is really dangerous, the pancreas increases more insulin. And here's the important part. You can have insulin resistance for years before your blood sugar becomes abnormal and you get flagged on a blood test with your physician. And this is why someone can be told your glucose looks normal while their insulin is already significantly elevated. And elevated insulin creates a whole host of problems. High insulin promotes things like fat storage, right? So if you can't lose weight, you're eating a caloric deficit, the weight's not budging, well, it's probably because your insulin is high. You have increased hunger, you have out of control cravings, your energy is constantly crashing because, your glycogen stores get used up, but your body then can't switch to burn fat because of that high insulin. And so you feel like you're starving, your energy is crashing, but you have all this stored energy in the form of fat on your body, but it's not being utilized, right? You're inflamed. And then typically with this, also your blood sugar is super, super unstable. So you go through these swings of feeling like your blood sugar's crashing, which then, you feel like you have to eat something sweet to get your blood sugar up, but then it puts you on that blood sugar roller coaster where it's going super high and then crashing super low and you feel awful. And this is why so many people feel like they're constantly fighting their body. And honestly, this is exactly where I was before I started to like sort out like, oh, what is insulin resistance? What is metabolic health? And what do these have to do with my diet and my exercise and my inability to lose weight, right? You're hungry all the time. This was me. I had so much food anxiety because I was always hungry. I was always thinking about food. Sometimes I could lose a little bit of weight temporarily, but I would inevitably always gain it back. I would crash after mealtime, feel like I have to take a nap. I'd be so tired. I'd wake up in the morning tired. And then I would feel super shaky when I didn't eat. These are often signs that metabolic flexibility, and by that I mean the ability to burn sugar for fuel and burn fat or ketones for fuel, has been lost. And a keto diet can be incredibly helpful here because it lowers the need for insulin from a dietary perspective. Lower carbohydrates generally mean lower insulin demand because the foods that you're eating aren't stimulating or converting into high amounts of glucose. So when insulin lowers, the body can finally start accessing stored fat more effectively. And now, I want to also mention how fasting and keto work beautifully together because fasting actually naturally lowers insulin too. I'm sure you've heard me say this before. Fasting is like the most direct way just to lower your insulin levels in your body because literally anytime you put food in your mouth, you are stimulating the production of insulin, right? And from the three macros, we have, carbohydrates, we have protein, and we have fat. Carbohydrates are typically going to be the biggest stimulator of insulin, especially if you're not going for just like those fibrous vegetables, simple starches, potatoes, things like that. They're going to be the highest stimulators of insulin. And then you have protein, which isn't directly going to stimulate insulin nearly as much as carbohydrates. But if you're eating too much protein, excess amino acids are converted into glucose via the liver to be stored if you've eaten too much. And this is, why when I talk about carnivore, some people struggle to lose weight if they're insulin resistant on carnivore because if you're eating 200 grams of protein as a middle-aged woman and you're not like hitting it super hard in the gym, your body just doesn't like have a need for that many amino acids. And so then those excess amino acids are being turned into glucose via the liver and being stored as fat and elevating your insulin. And then we have fat, which does not stimulate it's like the least stimulating for insulin, which is why, I like the keto diet. It's digested totally differently. And so, this is why I like a keto, which is high fat, moderate protein, low carb, paired with like a feasting and fasting approach, because this low carb way of eating often makes fasting easier because of the blood sugar swings. I should say because blood sugar swings become less dramatic when you're eating a ketogenic diet. And so, you're pushing down insulin with your fast, but then the days when you're feasting, you're not pushing insulin way back up. So it's like your insulin isn't on this roller coaster. You're just keeping insulin low all the time. So it's going to make switching between feasting and fasting feel much more effortless. Maybe that's not the right word, but it's going to make it feel less painful because, your blood sugar isn't going to be like going super high on feasting days and then much lower on fasting days. And people who tend to adapt a lower carb diet in conjunction with fasting often experience less food noise, fewer cravings, less reactive hunger, and just generally better satiety. And so now I want to shift a little bit and I want to talk a little bit more about insulin resistance. I know we talked about like what it is, but I want you to know how to identify if maybe you are insulin resistant, because I think one of the frustrating things about insulin resistance is that it often gets missed for many, many years. I had worked as a nutritionist in the health space and the functional medicine health space for years before I started to understand what insulin resistance was. Because many people are told that like everything on your labs look normal while you're actually actively struggling with symptoms. And so I want to kind of go through some of the common signs that you may experience if you are insulin resistant. So, number one, I think the easiest one is like you have difficulty losing weight. If you find that it seems like, everything you used to do doesn't work anymore, restricting calories doesn't really work. If you find that you respond really well to lowering carbohydrates, though, and that is helpful for losing weight, it's very, very likely that you're insulin resistant, especially if you find that you're carrying weight in your abdomen. That is also a sign of insulin resistance. If you find that you have like really intense cravings, you're constantly hungry, paired with like afternoon energy crashes, those are also signs of insulin resistance. Brain fog is another one where it's like you just don't feel very sharp mentally. You feel like you're constantly almost like sleep deprived, even when you're getting a lot of sleep. Your brain is just not running on all cylinders. That's a sign of insulin resistance. If you have reactive hypoglycemia, this is something I dealt with for years, and I actually had like some anxiety about accessibility to food around this issue. And reactive hypoglycemia is where your blood sugar crashes and it gets low because you haven't eaten. And typically you feel really shaky and like hungry, and you want to eat like something like a Snickers bar because, or like drink some juice because you can tell your blood sugar is really low and you need to bring it back up. Reactive hypoglycemia actually totally went away after I started fasting, which was really, really cool. If you have struggled with PCOS or infertility, PCOS, they actually just changed the name of PCOS, and I've been meaning to talk about this. Maybe we'll do it on another episode, but they are finally starting to realize, I think, the connection within the research of PCOS and metabolic dysfunction and insulin resistance. They go hand in hand. And where was I going with this? This causes a lot of issues with fertility. And so if you deal with PCOS, this could be a sign that, maybe your metabolic health isn't what it is, and maybe you are dealing with insulin resistance. Now, here's one that I unfortunately genetically am predisposed to are skin tags and insulin resistance. Skin tags are a sign that you are insulin resistant. And anytime I'm pregnant, which is an insulin resistant state, I get more skin tags, and it's just like, oh, so frustrating. But if you can get your insulin under control, it's going to get so much better. Also, darkened skin around the neck or the armpits is also a sign of insulin resistance. And actually, regarding skin tags, I had a conversation with my dermatologist a couple years ago, and I asked her if like this is something that she ever talks to her patients about, if she noticed someone has a lot of skin tags. And she's like, I'm just finally seeing the research catch up with like something that we've kind of known, because when we're high insulin, we're in like a pro-growth state, right? And so you're just gonna like grow more things, more fat, more skin tags, apparently, potentially, more cancer, or, if you have things in your body that you don't want to grow, you're in a pro-growth state if your insulin is high. And so reducing insulin is essential for your health, essentially. Other things to look for would be elevated triglycerides on, your lab work. So those are your blood fats. Honestly, you can have them below 70, 50. I think that at like the normal range on a blood, they won't be flagged on your like standard labs. I don't think unless they're above 120. I like to see them well below 100. That's a sign to me. If you're above 100 on your triglycerides, that's a sign to me that you're eating too many carbs and your body does not need that many carbs. Next is like fatty liver. If you have elevated liver enzymes, again, our liver is super important for fat mobilization. And then, very easily, a high fasting insulin is going to be a sign that you're insulin resistant. I like to see everyone below a 5 ideally for their fasting insulin. And then, if you have a history of something like gestational diabetes, that is going to be a huge red flag for insulin resistance, both for you and the baby that you were pregnant with. And then, lastly, if you find that you are increasingly having weight retention issues after pregnancies, it's a sign that you are becoming likely more and more insulin resistant. And I especially want to pause on this last one for a second because I think a lot of women, blame themselves unnecessarily when it comes to weight retention after pregnancies. And, if you notice that after each pregnancy, your body becomes more insulin resistant or maybe more inflamed, or just, in general became harder and harder to lose weight, that is really valuable information because pregnancy, like I said, is naturally increases our insulin resistance to help support the baby. It's a pro-growth state. But in some women, especially women who already have underlying metabolic dysfunction, that insulin resistance can worsen significantly over time. And so, if you're having trouble losing weight after pregnancies, there's nothing like your body isn't broken. It's just not reverting back to lower insulin the way that it's supposed to, right? So then you need to address that. And then, in regards to PCOS, like I said, PCOS and insulin resistance are deeply connected. And many women with PCOS, unfortunately, are treated purely from like a reproductive angle, while the metabolic component gets ignored. And thankfully, I think that is just now starting to change. They changed the name and added a metabolic component to it. But insulin resistance is often one of the root drivers of this metabolic dysfunction that's perpetuating PCOS. Now, in terms of labs here are some of my favorite markers to look at if you're trying to figure out, like, am I insulin resistant? Is this something that I should be taking notice for? So number one is fasting insulin. Again, I like to see it below 5. Then we have fasting glucose, which is just taking like a snapshot of that moment in time of exactly where your glucose is. So it's interesting. But I would say of all of these, it's like the least helpful probably. But it is always interesting. Like you can catch some things if like your glucose is really out of control. You can catch that with a fasting glucose. What I like more though when we're looking at like long-term blood sugar is hemoglobin A1C, which gives us about a 90-day snapshot of what your glucose has done over the course of those 90 days. And then I like to see like what are your triglycerides doing? That gives us a good idea overall of how many carbohydrates you're taking. HDL cholesterol is really interesting as well because it's going to kind of tell us, are you getting enough of like those like good, healthy, whole foods, fibrous vegetables and whatnot, or do you need more of those in your diet? And then also, I always find it interesting to look at the triglyceride to HDL ratio. And personally, fasting insulin is one of those favorite markers because it often becomes abnormal or elevated long before you see like your hemoglobin A1C actually start to increase. And by the time blood sugar is elevated, insulin resistance typically has often been brewing for many, many years. And again, this is why lower carb eating and fasting can be like this really powerful combination because instead of constantly stimulating insulin, we're finally giving the body opportunities for insulin to come down for a meaningful period of time. Now, I need to pause and take a sip of water because my throat is getting really dry. Now, this might surprise some people, but I actually don't teach a strict keto macro tracking approach inside of my coaching program, whether you do like Lifestyle School for Weight Loss, my course, or if you work with me one-on-one in my 8-week coaching program. And the reason is really simple. I've been doing this a very long time, over 10 years. I've been on my own journey for a very long time. I've had 4 kids and I've gained a significant amount of weight with each of them and then had to lose that. And at the end of the day, and I think pretty much any coach, nutrition coach can agree with me on this, whether or not you still do this approach, but I don't find that most people can sustainably adhere to macro or calorie counting long term. Can macro or calorie counting work, for a time? Absolutely. Can it teach you awareness? Absolutely. Can it help some people initially? I think that's definitely the case. But for many people, I think especially busy moms, women who just have so much on their plate and they're like at baseline are already stressed, or maybe, you're in that postpartum period, you're dealing with a newborn, you're juggling so much, or, if you're just like a professional, working a full-time job, taking things of, taking care of things at your home, people, are super, super busy and have so much on their plate already. I think it just adds something on top of that is typically not sustainable. And then you have like this other group of people when it comes to tracking, people with a history of obsessive dieting or tracking every gram of food. This practice of trying to track and weigh every gram or morsel of food that goes into your mouth, I think very, very quickly burns many people out. Because, life just continues to happen. As you've heard about my life on my, 6 weeks so far on my weight loss journey, life just continues to life, right? You go on vacation, you go to a birthday party. My daughter turned 5 this last week. So like, we were having birthday cake and ice cream, we have kids and their activities, we travel. Life just gets stressful for any number of reasons. You have people over, to eat, you go to someone's house to eat, maybe you go to a restaurant, and suddenly the diet that looked really perfect on paper, no longer works in real life. And I think this is like one of the biggest mistakes in nutrition in general, is assuming that just because, it would be ideal if people could track everything and, do this all of the time. Maybe that would be the most effective. That doesn't automatically make it the best plan, right? Because compliance matters when you're talking about nutrition and our diet. Sustainability matters. Our relationship with food matters. And, that's why I prefer a modified, I would say a keto approach centered around things like real whole foods instead of, hitting these perfect macros. I prefer an approach centered around just lowering carbohydrates naturally, really leaning into healthy fats and protein, a moderate amount of protein, and then focusing on fiber-rich vegetables that love you back, that make you feel good, instead of obsessing over, these exact macro percentage. I want you to like understand and embody principles, right, of eating, which are things like we prioritize protein at our meals. Our meals are built around healthy fats, around protein, around fibrous vegetables. We're continuously trying to reduce the amount of ultra processed foods that are in our diet. We want to have that focus on whole foods, things that are going to stabilize our blood sugar and make us feel really satiated. So that we don't need to snack constantly between meals, because we feel very satisfied after a meal. We eat until we feel satisfied, not until we feel stuffed. And then we're done eating until our next meal, right? And then with that, we pair it with fasting strategically. And what I have found is that approach tends to work much better long term for most people. I personally just have I almost have like an aversion to tracking my food. I have done it for periods of time, and I do think it can be helpful. But I don't find that it's something that people do long term. And now I want to just take a moment specifically to talk about fiber because I feel like fiber is constantly constantly out there. People are going back and forth about is like fiber good or is it bad? Because I do think some versions of keto underemphasize vegetables, and I do think, fiber matters. I think we have some good data to support that. Fiber supports satiety, digestion, like your microbiome, like the good bugs and the bad bugs in your gut. It works as like almost like soil for like the good bugs to proliferate, not proliferate, you guys, I can't say it, to like grow and multiply. Okay, you know what I'm trying to say. It helps with hormone detoxification for women specifically for estrogen, and it can help with blood sugar regulation. And so, and also I think it's always worth saying not everyone is the same, and not everyone needs to or should be eating the exact same diet. Because what makes me feel really good isn't necessarily going to make you feel really good. And that's why I think it's really good to learn about food, about how your body works, and then really pay attention to how your body's responding to it. And that's why I always say eat foods that you love and that love you back, because what loves me back might not love you back. So I would say my version of like a modified keto diet is not just eating bacon and butter all day long. While I do enjoy those foods, I would say it's protein, like fattier cuts of protein. I typically try to go for healthy fats. I'm having olives, avocados, nuts and seeds. Unfortunately, I don't love fish, but I do try to really lean into non-starchy vegetables. I love to saute them in olive oil with some like salt and garlic powder. I'm really going for nutrient density and blood sugar stability when I'm making my meals. And so, what that could look like would be like eggs with avocado and like sauteed spinach and onion. Maybe it looks like I do like salmon, but like salmon with asparagus that's been roasted in olive oil with some seasoning. Maybe it's taco bowls without chips or rice, and maybe I'll do cauliflower rice or just like the meat and the vegetables, right? And like a little bit of cheese. I'll do burger patties with salad, and you just skip the bun, or steak with roasted broccoli, which is like one of my favorite things. I really try to keep it really simple, really nourishing and satisfying, and importantly, sustainable, right? Because the whole reason why I named the course and this podcast Lifestyle School is because truly, it's about our lifestyle. This isn't a 30-day diet, an 8-week challenge. The goal is to be able to do this indefinitely until the day we die. So now let's talk about real quickly how this pairs with feasting and fasting. And I talk a lot about feasting and fasting because I believe the body truly thrives in cycles, not, chronic overconsumption and not chronic deprivation either. I think this cycle of feasting and fasting creates like a rhythm, periods of nourishment, periods of lowered insulin, periods of recovery, periods of repair. And I think modified keto often makes fasting feel easier because that stable blood sugar component, which reduces hunger swings that I mentioned earlier. Because when someone is eating highly processed carbohydrates all day long, fasting can feel miserable initially because our blood sugar becomes very unstable. And when insulin stabilizes and metabolic flexibility improves, many people notice that they have better appetite regulation, they're less food obsessed, they have more stable energy, and then their fasting windows become so much easier. And so, I want to say something important here, because I do think it's always really important to remind people of this, especially if you're coming from like an unhealthy relationship with food, is that fasting should never become self-punishment, right? We don't fast because we binge ate all weekend and this is our punishment for like what we did, right? This is not about starving ourselves smaller. It's about improving our metabolic health. And that's why feasting matters too, right? It's the cycle of feasting and fasting because our nutrients really matter. Like the nutrients we choose to build and replenish with. The protein matters, the type of protein, and then along with that, also things like our sleep and our stress are a really big deal because at the end of the day, we can't outfast things like chronic stress or sleep deprivation or using our feasting days to binge on ultra processed foods because then we're never having that nourishing component. And the body is always listening to the environment we create. And so if you're going to fast, you have to also feast, but feasting with the right foods is what's truly going to make the fasting do like the incredible work to heal your body to get you to the health and the weight that you want. And so lastly, the last kind of part of this that I want to touch on is kind of no, it's not really along those lines. I want to talk about seasons of eating because I think one of the most important things that I've learned as like a coach and just on my own journey over the years is that what your body needs today isn't necessarily what it's going to need a year from now. What worked for you 5 years ago may not work today. What worked 50 pounds ago may not work now. So, like my needs right now at, almost 40 pounds overweight, because I think I'm about like 13 pounds down now, total from the 50 pounds I have to lose. Once I get to that 50 pounds weight loss, like maybe I will be able to eat more carbs than I can right now, based on my goals, based on like what my hormones are doing, what my body needs. But, in 10 years from now, when I am in perimenopause, hopefully I don't start perimenopause for 10 years, but we'll see. What my needs are in perimenopause may be different than what I need right now, right? In my mid 30s. And so, there are seasons, and I think this is really important. And I think we discount this. There's postpartum, there's perimenopause, there's menopause. We have super high stress seasons. We have seasons of healing, like physical, like if we're going through something, our body's healing. We have seasons of maintenance, where I'm trying to maintain this new weight loss that we achieved. We're sometimes in seasons of trying to build muscle and or potentially you're in a season of active fat loss. And I think and this is why I wanted to bring this up. Whenever we talk about like specific diets, whether it's keto, whether it's carnivore, vegetarian, whatever, I think we get into trouble when we start to turn diets into identities, right? People start saying like, I'm going to be keto forever because, it's worked so well for me and I feel so good. Or I'm going to be carnivore forever, or I'm going to be someone who does a bunch of fasting forever. And I just want to say that our health is much more nuanced than that. And, I've just been in this industry for a long time. And what I think has been really interesting is there's like some really big influencers who were like, if you eat vegetables, like you're poisoning your body because of the oxalates, or, and they're like screaming this, from the hilltops. And, people are like, okay, I'm never going to eat spinach again. And they, go carnivore or keto or whatever it is. And they feel really good for a time. But then if you watch these big influencers, like over time, what they have said changes because they realize like, oh, well, I need I need a little bit of fruit if I've been like really strict carnivore. Maybe I do want to incorporate a little bit of fiber into my diet. And their body's needs change over time. And so that is why I think I think I said this last week, but if someone is like telling you it's this is the only right way to do XYZ, I think that should be a big red flag for you because our health, the human body is so much more nuanced than that. There is not just one right way. Like I've said earlier in this podcast, what works really well for me may not work well for you, and that is okay, right? Like our health history is all different, like what our body has experienced, what we've lived through. Our gut microbiome is different. The environment we're currently living in is different. Our resources are different. And all of the, like how much sleep we're getting, our stress levels, all of that plays into how our body responds to the food that we eat and when we eat it and what we can and can't tolerate, right? And so I'd much rather teach someone metabolic awareness and flexibility than super strict, rigid food rules. Because at the end of the day, right, the goal is metabolic flexibility, the ability to efficiently use both glucose and fat for fuel so that we can have things like stable energy and reduced cravings and improved hunger signaling, and have long-term sustainability. And sometimes, that's going to mean tighter control on our carbohydrate intake. And sometimes that's going to mean like allowing ourselves to have more carbs. Maybe it's going to mean more fasting or less fasting, but at the end of the day, what I want you to take away from this part of the episode is that your body changes, your hormones change, your stress and your activity changes, and wisdom on your health journey is learning to adapt to the season that you're in and the needs that your body currently has. And so with that, you guys, we're going to wrap this up. I do think that keto can be incredibly therapeutic for insulin resistance. So if you are suspicious or know that you are dealing with insulin resistance, I think doing something that's going to lower your insulin is one of like the things that you can so easily do when it comes to your diet to help you on your journey. Because I do think lowering insulin is one of, these not missing conversations, but it's just not talked about enough in modern weight loss. And also, like I said, I believe sustainability matters deeply. And so we're not trying to do anything perfectly over here. We're not trying to be obsessive about macro tracking. And we don't want to fear every gram of carbohydrate forever. Like carbs shouldn't be scary, but at the end of the day, we need to have awareness, right? We need to have consistently. We need to focus on whole, real foods. And the goal is metabolic flexibility and a strategy that we can actually live with day over day over day. Because at the end of the day, like I said, the best diet is the one that you can adhere to and the one that loves you back. The goal is never to punish our body into submission, into weight loss. The goal is healing, to have energy, stability, freedom, and long-term metabolic health. So guys, with that, I want to say once again, thank you so much for being here today. Thanks for listening to this episode. I hope you found it helpful. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button, share it with a friend, leave a review, and let me know what topics you would like to hear about via Instagram or Facebook over at Hope Hot Coaching. And with that, guys, we'll see you next week on the Lifestyle School podcast.